Here is a number that should stop you mid-scroll. Across multiple large-scale studies conducted over the past decade, the rate of anxiety and depression diagnoses among teenagers and young adults has risen sharply in some countries, more than doubling since the early 2010s. Not because young people suddenly became weaker or softer or less resilient than previous generations. Something changed in the environment they grew up in. And once you see what changed, the numbers stop being mysterious and start being explainable. This is not a story about blame. It is not a story designed to make you afraid of your phone or afraid for your kids. It is a story about what the data actually shows. When you look at it carefully, what changed for the generation that grew up entirely inside the smartphone era, why those changes affected mental health the way they did. And this is the part that matters most, what is actually working to help. Because here's the thing that gets lost in most coverage of this topic. The Gen Z mental health story is not just a crisis story. It is also, increasingly, a story about a generation that talks about mental health more openly, seeks help more often, and is breaking down stigma. Faster than any generation before it, both of those things are true at the same time, and understanding both is the only way to actually understand what is happening. Let's go through what the research actually says. Every generation grows up inside an environment shaped by the technology, economy, and culture of its time. Baby boomers grew up with television entering every home. Gen X grew up with the rise of dual-income households and increased mobility. Millennials grew up as the internet transitioned from a novelty to infrastructure. Gen Z is the first generation in human history to go through adolescence with smartphones and social media as a constant feature of daily life. Not something they adopted as teenagers or adults. Something that was simply there, the way electricity or running water was there for previous generations. Researchers studying adolescent mental health have identified a consistent pattern across the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and many other countries. Rates of depression and loneliness among adolescents began rising noticeably starting around 2012. That timing is not arbitrary. 2012 is roughly when smartphone ownership among teenagers crossed the majority threshold and when platforms like Instagram became central to teenage social life. This does not mean smartphones are the only cause. Mental health is influenced by many factors like genetics, family environment, and economic conditions. Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt shows that the decline correlates closely with the shift from a play-based childhood to a phone-based childhood. Previous generations spent time with peers in person, building social skills and developing independence gradually. Gen Z spent a larger proportion of childhood indoors, on screens, with interaction mediated through platforms designed for engagement rather than well-being.
What the numbers actually show, let's get specific, because vague claims about kids these days do nothing to help anyone. Here is what large-scale survey data consistently shows. According to data compiled from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control's Youth Risk Behavior Survey, the percentage of high school students reporting persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness rose substantially between 2011 and the early 2020s. The increase particularly pronounced among teenage girls, surveys conducted by Gallup and Pew. Research have found that Gen Z adults report higher rates of anxiety and depression diagnoses than any previous generation did at the same age, based on comparable historical survey data going back to the 1990s. Sleep is one of the clearest casualties. Multiple studies have found that average sleep duration among teenagers has declined significantly over the past 2 decades, with late-night phone and social media use identified as a major contributing factor. Sleep deprivation in adolescence is strongly linked to increased rates of depression, anxiety, and difficulty regulating emotions, meaning that even if social media itself had no direct psychological effect, its impact on sleep alone would be enough to influence mental health outcomes. Loneliness is another consistent finding. Despite being the most digitally connected generation in history, Gen Z consistently reports higher rates of loneliness. Researchers describe this as a paradox of connection: more contact, less genuine connection, scrolling through curated highlight reels of other people's lives. Comparing yourself constantly to filtered and edited versions of your peers can leave people feeling isolated. Economic conditions compound all of this. Gen Z came of age during a period of significant economic uncertainty. The aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis shaped the childhoods of older Gen Z members, and many entered the workforce during the COVID-19 pandemic. Housing costs relative to income have risen substantially, making the traditional markers of adult independence feel increasingly out of reach for many young people. That sense of a foreclosed future is, according to multiple surveys, a significant contributor to anxiety about the future among young adults. The part the headlines often miss, here is where this story gets more complicated and more hopeful than the crisis framing alone suggests. Part of the rise in reported mental health conditions reflects something positive. Gen Z talks about mental health far more openly than previous generations did. Surveys consistently show that young people today are significantly more likely to recognize symptoms of anxiety and depression and to seek professional help. This matters enormously, because it means some of the increase in diagnosed conditions is not purely an increase in suffering. It is also an increase in recognition and reporting. Previous generations experienced anxiety and depression too. They were often less likely to name it. A teenager in the 1980s experiencing clinical depression might never have been diagnosed and might have simply been described as moody or going through a phase. That doesn't mean the underlying rise in distress isn't real, but the picture is not simply Gen Z is falling apart while everyone else was fine. It's more accurate to say real pressures increased. And at the same time, the willingness and ability to name those pressures increased too. Gen Z's openness about mental health has had ripple effects across workplaces, schools, and families. Mental health days are increasingly normalized. Therapy and counseling are increasingly seen by young people as a normal part of maintaining well-being, the same way going to the gym is normal.
So what does the research say about what works? This is the part of the conversation that gets the least attention, and it deserves more. Sleep is one of the most consistently identified protective factors. Adolescents and young adults who maintain consistent sleep schedules, even modest improvements like an extra 30 to 60 minutes per night, show measurable improvements in mood regulation, anxiety symptoms, and stress resilience. Simple interventions like keeping phones out of bedrooms at night or using device settings that limit notifications during sleep hours have shown real effects. In-person social connection remains one of the strongest protective factors against depression and anxiety at any age. Programs that increase structured opportunities for in-person interaction, sports, clubs, community programs, or simply spending unstructured time with friends without devices present, are consistently associated with better mental health outcomes. Physical activity has one of the most robust evidence bases. Regular exercise, even moderate amounts, has been shown repeatedly to reduce symptoms of mild to moderate depression and anxiety. This is not a replacement for professional treatment, but it is one of the most accessible tools available. Professional mental health support, therapy, counseling, and medication, when appropriate, remains one of the most effective tools. The increase in young people accessing these services is a positive development, even though healthcare systems are under strain. That capacity gap is a systemic problem that deserves more resources. And finally, social media use. The picture is nuanced. Passive consumption, endless scrolling, and comparison is more strongly associated with negative outcomes than active use, like messaging friends. Structured breaks from social media produce measurable improvements in mood and life satisfaction. Here's what all of this adds up to. Gen Z is navigating a genuinely different environment shaped by technology that didn't exist for the previous generation. That gap is why many young people feel like systems aren't built for the world they face. At the same time, Gen Z is the most equipped generation in terms of language and willingness to seek help. This moment is not just a crisis, but a turning point. The stigma that kept previous generations silent is eroding. Anxiety and depression are real conditions with real impacts. But understanding why rates have risen points toward concrete, evidence-based things that help: sleep, connection, movement, support, and honesty. The story of Gen Z's mental health isn't a story with a villain. It's a story of a generation building a culture around mental health that is healthier and more honest than anything before it. The path forward is visible. If anything here resonated with you, please know that reaching out to a professional or a trusted person is a sign of strength. If you know someone struggling, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply ask how they're really doing and actually listen to the answer. Thanks for watching. Share this with someone who might find it helpful, and let me know in the comments what's helped you when things have felt hard.